One of the greatest upsets during the Hungarian Grand Prix was the Red Bull's underperformance, but it looks like the team is in for even more trouble in the remainder of 2024. Having relied on Verstappen too much during the bad results of Perez, the pre-championship winning version of the Dutchman being seen in Hungary is definitely not a good sign for the future of the team, and the only solution for them is to collect themselves up and pick up the broken pieces. However, with teams like McLaren and Mercedes catching up massively ever since Miami, could this be the start of the end of Red Bull's dominance? Max Verstappen was one very unhappy bunny during the Hungarian Grand Prix, and it doesn't take a genius to understand how angry he was during his radio messages, as the team made poor strategy decisions for the first time in God knows how long. This didn't bode well with Verstappen, who went on to express his emotions during the 2 pit stops that saw him being undercut from Hamilton first and then Leclerc as well. And when he pushed too hard on the 3rd stint with a medium tyre, the Dutchman was given a sarcastic comment from Lambiase as to how he took care of the tyres, to which he replied, "No, don't give me that stuff right now. You guys gave me this effing strategy, okay? I'm trying to rescue what's left, for God's sake." I would normally assume that you know that these are not the exact words Verstappen used, but due to the explicit content, we'd like to keep things as clean as possible. What is not clean, however, is the fact that the RB20 is not in the best position right now, and ever since Miami it's been the Verstappen factor that has won difficult races like the ones in Canada and in Imola. Truth be told, the strategy was on point in every race so far, and had it not been for the correct calls in Silverstone, Max would have easily finished P5, as he was passed by both McLarens on pure merit. As he himself admitted that at a certain point the race looked like one where he would finish P6. Earlier this year, we must remind you that Verstappen was quite happy that other drivers were winning races, as he said that it's very good for the sport. This made many believe that he's actually happy that there's some competition up front and he could show his true talent in wheel-to-wheel racing. But in the last 3 races, Verstappen has ended up with incidents in 2 where he was challenged or was challenging a driver for a position, which goes to show that maybe the emotions are getting the best of him. A similar situation happened in Austria in terms of the emotions getting out of hand, but nevertheless, it wasn't nearly as bad as in Hungary, where he even said the stewards are the ones that need to be medically checked and not him. Part of the poor performance of Red Bull goes to the package of upgrades that they weren't quite happy with, and when talking about this situation in a greater extent, Marco said, "It was the first race with the upgrades, and Budapest is not exactly a typical racetrack. Let's wait and see what Spa looks like. Normally you gain more knowledge with every race. I don't want to make a final judgment. Max must now show some patience and understanding. The summer break is now urgently needed." This situation is vastly different from the first 5 races, and while it was visible that the RB20 wasn't the best car on the grid, judging by Perez's performance, who went on to be out-qualified regularly by Sargent after being a constant podium achiever, many believe that Verstappen would continue with his dominance and win the majority of the races in 2024. But now in Hungary, the tide turned against him and the emotions got the worst out of his behaviour. He went into a very fierce fight with Hamilton, who raced hard at turn 2 as Verstappen felt like he was pushed to the side, which was denied straight away by Lambiase, who said that the Dutchman wasn't ahead at the apex. Nevertheless, Verstappen didn't want to give up, and just a couple of laps later he launched a fierce dive bomb into turn 1, where he and Hamilton collided, and he almost suffered terminal damage to the car, given the fact that it was launched around 45 degrees into the air. Luckily for Verstappen, he was able to finish P5, but he didn't accept the blame for the crash and said that it was Hamilton who turned into him, something that the 7-time world champion just laughed at, knowing that there's nothing he could have done to change it. Regardless of that, Lambiase has also sent a fierce warning towards Verstappen when he said that Hamilton moved under braking, something that he scrutinised a lot in Austria, as he did the same moves on Norris as well. When talking about the request of Verstappen to argue the incident and to seek investigation from the FIA, Lambiase said, "I'm not even going to get into a radio fight with the other teams, Max. We will let the stewards do their thing. It's childish to do it on the radio, Max. Childish." What has been a recent worry after the Budapest Grand Prix is the emotions from Max. Of course he would be angry about finishing P5 and not being able to compete for a race win. However, the Dutchman said that he would have been happy if the strategy was okay and he would have finished P3. The 3-time world champion understood that they didn't have the best package right now, despite bringing upgrades that should have put them on top of things, but Ever since the race started and he made an overtake from the outside and was forced to give the position back, we knew that a special version of Verstappen would have been unlocked in Hungary. Now, it's also safe to assume that Perez's form, even though he improved massively during the race, is not something that Red Bull can rely on for the remainder of the season. This is something that put a lot of additional pressure on Verstappen's shoulders, as he might get a little bit nervous from carrying the team ever since Miami and then receiving bad strategy. Maybe he feels like his perfection should be matched by perfection from the other side of the pit wall, but nevertheless, champions like Verstappen should gather the emotions in one bag and put them on the side when he's racing, because his tantrums are definitely throwing the team away from their perfect operating window. Verstappen has acknowledged that this was a very bad race with a very poor tactic, which is something that made Marco scratch his head too, as the team expected a lot more due to the great practice sessions they had. When talking about this to a greater extent, Verstappen went on to say, "Obviously it's not a crisis, but it's been a few races now where things are difficult. The car is obviously not up to speed. I mean, it's not like suddenly next weekend we can have upgrades on the car. So yeah, it's not like suddenly next weekend we can have new upgrades on the car. So yeah, we are in a big problem." Furthermore, Verstappen went on to send a fierce warning to the engineers back in Milton Keynes, saying that they need to wake up and that the excuse of reaching the ceiling is not something that he will tolerate for the remainder of the season. As he added, "Not everyone realizes the situation we're currently in, I think. With me, they know that I don't make excuses. I'm always very real. I think some people might need to wake up a little bit." But the situation stands as it is, and in this case, we cannot deny the fact that Red Bull has been underperforming heavily when Verstappen isn't winning the race. For example, on both occasions that he's been involved in a crash in Austria and Hungary, Perez finished behind him at P7. This is not what Red Bull needs heading into the remainder of 2024 and in Spa. It's also expected that Red Bull would mount Verstappen with the 5th engine, which would automatically give him a 10-place grid penalty. This would normally be a laughing matter for the Austrian squad, because if we were back in 2022 or 2023, but now that the competition is so tight ahead of him, it's not even guaranteed that Verstappen would start P11 after the penalty, as the pole position is all but granted for him. To top that off, this has been the first 3-race stretch that Verstappen hasn't won a race ever since the ending stages of 2021, where he didn't win in Brazil, Qatar, and in Saudi Arabia. And that goes to show what type of streak Verstappen's been on and why these emotions are running so high. It's definitely a problem that Red Bull needs to deal with properly, and if the upgrades are not working, then we could easily say that both of the championships, especially the constructors' ones, are in a massive danger, and some adjustments may be made in the driver's selection, considering the fact that Verstappen could also leave the team if these turbulences continue. Wolff is definitely very happy with everything that's going on in Red Bull right now, and the Austrian has been adamant that the vacant seat of Hamilton is always going to be reserved for Verstappen if he decides to pull the plug on the Red Bull project. Because as all things stand, 2026 is anybody's guess in terms of who ends up where on the grid, with the new engine and aerodynamic transformations. What needs to be addressed now is the tension in Red Bull, as well as Verstappen's emotions, and what he needs to work on a lot more now that he doesn't have the most competitive car in his hands are his emotions. He would often find himself fighting in these positions, and even though he said it's good for the sport and for him as a driver, he didn't actually show it during the race with Hamilton. With all of this in mind, where do you think Verstappen's mind lies with Red Bull? And more importantly, do you think that there's a future between these two ahead of 2025? Let us know in the comments below, and once you do that, make sure to click on the video that's appearing on your screen right now.